welcome to episode 182 of Manage the Wilds. I'm Nick Madsen. Yesterday, I got in touch with a biologist in the area that I live and asked if I could go along and if he was doing any classifying for pre-hunt. And he invited me along today. So it was a lot of fun. The plan was, as we talked about it last night, and then this morning when we left, I woke up at 4:30 so we could be the area in time for sunrise, or that half hour before sunrise when you start seeing the movement of these animals. And we were planning on classifying in an area because he had elk collar that he needed to retrieve. So I picked his brain about the elk collar. It was a yearling bull elk that had died sometime Tuesday. I'm not sure when it actually died, but it was sometime Tuesday. And he wanted to go in and retrieve it as quick as possible. And I asked him, I said, do you know what caused it? What do you think caused it? And he said, I have no idea. We're not usually losing a lot of yearlings at this time. So the only thing that he could really think of was it was either injured, caught in a fence, or predation. Disease in this area for elk wasn't really a possibility. So we traveled to the area, and as we got close, we realized that we'd actually be able to drive within a couple hundred yards. Ended up being about 150 yards that we drove to. But as we were going along, we were classifying, and what was interesting is we saw more animals on the highway than when we got to the area that we were starting to classify. And ultimately, we didn't see a single mule deer, which for this area is just like unbelievable. Because I was very close, or I was pretty close to this area yesterday. And I saw 4 points and does. I saw elk. I saw just a whole lot of vegetation. And so for me, it was just unbelievable that we didn't see anything. So we used Onyx map, got as close to the GPS location as we could when we drove up there, and we started to walk in on it. We come over a ridge, and there, laying next to the tree, was this dead elk. And when you came across it, you could see the lower half of the body was ripped wide open, stomach contents were strewn out across the ground, and you couldn't see the front end. And as we started looking for the head, we realized that it had been covered, and immediately we both had the same thing. The biologist said this is definitely a cougar kill. So we pulled the head out, drug the body out of the pile that it had been buried in. He reached in and fished out the head, and we got the collar off. He then grabbed the head, flipped it over, and where the decay hadn't started, because it was full of maggots on the front end, and the decay, and on the sides of its face you could see puncture wounds from where it had been gripped by its head as the cougar held onto it and suffocated it and ripped out its throat. The other thing that was interesting is it was a young bull. It was a spike, and both of the spikes had been broken off. They weren't there. So I don't know if it happened during the struggle. Did it happen before? We just couldn't find them. And it's not like we had to search a very big area. The area that we searched for the drag marks of this thing was only about 3 yards wide. So more than likely the biologist believes that it was taken in its bed, and that's where it was killed. We both believed that it was a cougar kill, but he still wanted to take a few samples. So the femur on the hind had been all the way cleaned up and exposed. And so he grabbed the femur, we cracked it open. He cracked it open with a giant rock, and the marrow was just white and that butter look to it. So it was a healthy yearling that had just been killed by a cougar. What is interesting for me is in episode 181, we talk about the annual elk survival in a multiple carnivore system, and how mountain lions are in that area that they were done are by far the biggest predator. Now, the area that I live in the Intermountain West, we basically have coyotes, mountain lions, black bears. We don't have any wolves here. And so it was just really interesting after going through yesterday's reading and how cougars are targeting these elk calves, and then to come in on a yearling that was very clearly a calf. The other thing that was interesting is that the ground around the stomach contents was very moist, and there was some pooling of liquid from the stomach contents. The other thing is the stomach contents themselves were very moist, hadn't dried out like you would see if you had left it for a couple hours. And the thought process there is that we most likely pushed the cougar off the kill when we drove into the area. He went down and grabbed a trail cam, and I walked around the area 50, 80 yards, looking up into the trees, trying to see if I could identify where the cougar might be. The ground was very hard, and I'm not skilled at tracking, so I was unable to locate the cougar. But he did set up a trail cam that we're hoping that we didn't disturb the area too much and that the cougar will come back to the kill. Doing a little more reading today after this, after dealing and reading that paper of the annual elk calf survival in a multiple predator system, I then went on to look up like what are kill rates or predation rates for cougars. And in Wyoming and Montana, they did a study. Now, it didn't involve cougars. It didn't involve elk in this situation. They had a mule deer and other deer, most likely whitetail. But they also had a lot of bighorn sheep and then possible elk. So they didn't really say for sure that there was no elk in this study. But what they did come up with is the estimated rates or predation rates and the total number of days between kills. There was a female that they had monitored for over 416 days, put out 2,000 different GPS locations, had, they believed, a total number of 67 kills in that 416 days, which came out to an average rate of 5.95 days between predation events. So roughly every 6 days, this female was killing him. And then they had a male that they monitored for 400 days. They had over 2,400 GPS locations. And they only had a total number of 38 kills. And it averaged almost 10 days between kills. But the average was somewhere between 6 and 7 days between kills. And so that's a lot of events. So you're looking at a total of, just roughly 1 kill per week, somewhere around that. So it was just an interesting day between doing yesterday's podcast episode where we looked at actual elk calf survival based upon the predators in their areas, and then today to come in on a cougar kill. After we set up the camera, we left the area and we started our way back down, and while we were classifying, we just weren't seeing the numbers that we thought we would. We ended up seeing 3, I wouldn't call them raghorns, but they were 3 bull elk, probably 2, 3, maybe 4 years old. I wouldn't say 4, but 2 or 3. And then we ended up seeing 3 cows, 3 calves, not a single mule deer. So these numbers are actually really low for the biologist in that area. We know there's animals in there. They have collared quite a few elk, and the collars show they were in there. But the aspens and the pines, they were so thick and it was 65, almost 70 degrees this morning. So it may have been a little warmer, and that's why they moved into those deep, thick pines or those aspen areas before we can see them. But it was so difficult to spot anything because it was so thick in that area. But all in all, I had a really enjoyable day. It was a good. It was fun to be able to come in to a situation like that, watch how biologists assess the situation and the different things they're taking as far as sample wise, and what they're looking for, and the information that they're hoping to gain. Hopefully I'll be able to see some pictures in the next 7 or so days, and we'll see what was coming into it. The other thing that was interesting about this cougar predation rate is they had, in a lot of the instances, after a cougar would come in and kill something, they had black bears that would also then come in. And so it'll be interesting to see, because there are black bears in the area, it'll be interesting to see how many or if any black bears will come in, and whether this cougar will come back and visit. All right, you guys, have a great day. Stay wild.